Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Pharmacist Support's A Dose of Wellbeing podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Cochrane, and today is a special episode linked to Stress Awareness Month and the charity's 185th birthday. We're joined by our Chief Executive, Danielle Hunt, and Chairman of the Pharmacists Defense Association, Mark Koziol, to talk about how the two organizations are working together to support those in the pharmacy profession who may find themselves facing challenges. So welcome, Danielle and Mark.
Hi.
Hi, Melissa.
So Mark, I'll start with you. The PDA has been donating £1 per member to Pharmacist Support since 2017, which has now grown into an incredibly meaningful partnership. So for those who may not be familiar with the organization, can you tell us a little about why you established the PDA and the role it plays in supporting pharmacists?
Yes, Melissa. As I look back, I realise now what an interesting story it was at the time. It just felt it was the right thing to do. But I used to be a member of the Council of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the late 90s. I was quite young in those days. And I remember one of the first things that we had to deal with was this famous case, which we now call the peppermint water case. It's taught in schools of pharmacy, where a young pharmacist and a pre-registration trainee ended up making a terrible dispensing error with peppermint water. The result was a young baby died. Terrible tragedy for the family, an irreplaceable loss. But it was also a huge personal tragedy for the pharmacists involved. It was a catastrophe for the profession, for the employer. Their names were in the headlines, etc. We were in a unique situation because we were the regulator. We got to see very closely all of the information, a lot of the evidence, and we understood exactly what happened. So I was really, really worried when I realised that this young pharmacist and the pre-reg were going to be facing the blame, effectively. They ended up taking all of the blame for what happened. And when you saw all the evidence, it was abundantly clear to me at the time the employer should have been involved in that case. They too should have been in the stakes, dealing with the workplace situation. They were partially responsible for what happened, in my personal view. What happened next really was a seminal moment for me in my entire profession, because they ended up getting a prosecution, these two young pharmacists. The employer walked away with no consequences as far as the prosecution was concerned. And the lawyers that were defending these two pharmacists were actually being paid for, and the entire strategy of the defence was being controlled by the employer. So that really, really upset an awful lot of people. It certainly upset me. And I felt that something needed to be done about it. So I left the Council of the Pharmaceutical Society and spent the next 18 months preparing to establish the Pharmacist Defence Association, because I was absolutely determined that never again should an employee be looked after and rely on their employer's legal defence in the event that something catastrophic goes wrong in the workplace. Now, the employers aren't bad people, but they've got a job to do by law. The directors of any company have to look after the company's interests and the shareholders' interests ahead of the interests of the individuals. And that means that the workforce, the pharmacists, the locums, will always end up at the end of a queue as far as the blame is concerned. So we set up the PDA in 2003. The very first thing that we did was we gave free membership to students and pre-regis, because we never ever wanted, especially the young pharmacists, to face a situation where they were reliant on their employer. The operation grew and grew, and today we stand at nearly 41,000 members. Wow. We're now at the stage where we're supporting pharmacists in 5,000 episodes per year, 100 new cases coming in every week. And we often wonder what would have happened to all those pharmacists had we not been around as an association. Where would they have gone, and who would have looked after them? So I'm looking back now, and it has been a real journey, but every day is different, and you live from one day to the next. And it's only in moments like this, when somebody asks you the question, look back at what happened, you realise that something really, really useful was developed to help pharmacists and protect them in their jobs going forward.
That's a really interesting story. And one of the things that strikes me about that is that there was something in you that said, I need to take action. And not everybody would take action. They might be upset, they might be sad, they might think this isn't fair, but to actually step up and do something about it is pretty unique. And I think that what you've done is pretty extraordinary from that story. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So our partnership, Pharmacist Support and the PDA, has been going since 2017, and you've been donating £1 per member since that time. And it's now, I think the donations now stand at around £345,000, which is a huge amount of money and has enabled us to do an awful lot at Pharmacist Support. Why was it important to you and to the PDA to support the profession's charity in this way?
So pharmacists are trained to look after patients, and that's what they do during their working lives. They're often unprepared when something goes wrong in the workplace. They might face a dispute with their employer, which typically is the large part of it, or they might get a letter from the regulator to say, there's been a report about you, we now want to investigate you. They might end up just like those poor pharmacists in the peppermint water case facing a prosecution, and often they are unprepared to deal with that. They come to us for help. If they're lucky enough to be in membership, we can help them straight away. More often than not, we get contacted by people who weren't members but end up in trouble, and they say, we wish we would have joined. But what happens next is they end up suffering because they just don't know how to deal with the consequences. The lawyers can help them. We do, I think, a tremendous job in defending pharmacists. But sadly, for quite a few pharmacists, that experience actually breaks them. It breaks them psychologically, it breaks them mentally, it affects their health. So we have recognised for a long time, and our relationship with Pharmacist Support goes back way beyond 2017, but we felt now is the time to do something about it in 2017. When they get to that place, we find that the good home to send them to at that stage is Pharmacist Support, because Pharmacist Support provides the service, has the personnel who are trained, has the expertise to help those pharmacists who end up getting broken, because they need a special kind of care, the kind of care that we directly at the PDA can't provide, but we feel can be provided through Pharmacist Support. And the reason why we decided to donate, because it was the right and proper thing to do. And if our role is to look after pharmacists who are in trouble, then part of that job is to help Pharmacist Support do the job, the excellent job that they do for pharmacists.
That really resonates with me, what you said about the deep personal impact on individuals when they go through a case like this, because it's really not something that is as headline grabbing. You know, you'll see the headlines, but you won't necessarily think about the impact on the people behind the scenes. And it's not just the impact on that individual, is it? It's their whole family. It's the ripples go outward from that person as well. And so I think you're absolutely right that these people need a lot of care and a lot of support to come out of what is probably a devastating situation. So thank you for understanding it and acknowledging that. I think that's really important. So Danielle, partnerships like this can have a real impact behind the scenes. Can you share a little bit about the impact the PDA's support has had on Pharmacist Support and the people that we're here to help?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you've just said that figure, around 345,000. That's a huge amount. So you can just imagine the impact that amount of money has. For us as a charity, we've faced a huge increase in demand for our services, particularly in the last 5 years since the pandemic. So that type of money really helps us to deliver what we can do. Last year, we actually reported on our 5-year strategy, which launched in 2020, and that just showed the huge demand we'd seen. We saw an 82% increase in financial applications for financial support from 2020 to 2025. That's a huge amount. So there are definitely things that people are facing. I think as more awareness of the charity is being raised as well, what's really great about that is more people are seeking support. But for us as a charity, then we have to meet that demand, and we can't do that without the donations that we receive. And I think what's important about the PDA donation, because it's that fixed £1 per member, it's a regular stream of income. We know it's coming, we can plan that work, and we can deliver what we need to. So it has a huge impact for us, and we just hope that more people can see the benefit. Because for me, Mark touched on it before, I think people don't understand, like the crucial role and the things that pharmacists face. And I think as a profession, we're very lucky to have a charity like Pharmacist Support. The PGA, as Mark says, supports people through, but he makes a really good point that these are individuals, these are normal people. When you're facing something really challenging, it can break you, and you need to have that safety net. And Pharmacist Support provides that safety net, so no one's left on their own, that we can support them as well through that process. So for me, it's a really important partnership, because I think it provides that support for somebody going through something probably never expected to be going through, and probably one of the hardest things they'll be going through at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So pharmacy as a profession can bring great reward. It's a helping profession. You see people coming in and you can see the direct impact of your work on individuals. So it's very rewarding in that sense. But of course, it comes with significant pressures, and these can be pressures around regulation, pressures around making mistakes. We know there are staffing pressures. We could go on and on about the pressures that pharmacy is facing. But why is it important that organizations across the profession work together to support well-being specifically?
I mean, it's highly reported, the challenges that people are facing in pharmacy. It's not an easy place to be, and individuals are being impacted. But no single organisation can solve these challenges alone, and I think we've all got a part to play. I mean, our own research shows, we've got really high levels of potential burnout. There are people being severely impacted in terms of mental health and well-being. And that drives things like increased absences, increased staff turnover. We've got a real risk of losing some great pharmacists from the profession, because they just feel they've had enough and they need to step away. So, but we've all got a crucial role to play in making sure that doesn't happen. And some of the issues pharmacists tell us about in terms of things impacting their mental health are things like inadequate staffing, lack of kind of colleague support and that senior support, lack of work-life balance, long working hours. This is all contributing to these potential high levels of burnout. And to me, points to quite poor workplace cultures. So to make that change, I think we all need to come together and recognise that and say, what can we do to change that, to make these environments, more conducive so that people can thrive at work and don't face these kind of challenges. And I think there's still a lot of work to do. There's also still a lot of work to do, I think, around reducing the stigma around mental health and wellbeing. And we've been doing quite a lot of work on that. The PGA supports us in that in terms of the Act Now Wellbeing campaign, kind of getting behind that, which is all about encouraging people to talk about mental health, to talk about what they need. But kind of as a dedicated charity in the profession, we're in quite a unique situation because we can provide that tailored support. As I mentioned, I think it's quite a privilege to have that because, there's lots of charities out there, but I think Pharmacist Support really recognise some of the challenges. And I think if we all work together, we can kind of provide that support and then look at the root cause. I mean, if we don't look at the root cause, we don't want to be helping more people day to day. We want to be reducing the amount of people who need support from the charity. We don't really want to have to be here. So I think to do that, we all need to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of well-being from the PDA's perspective, I understand that you've launched a well-being strategy last year. Why did you feel it was important to have a well-being strategy? I'd love to hear a bit about what prompted the decision, why you think it's so important, and maybe how we can talk about this more openly in the profession.
So one of the things that we see happen very regularly in the job that we do is the working conditions that pharmacists are in are deteriorating and have been consistently over many years. Now, that causes stress. Stress for the pharmacists, stress for the staff that work in pharmacies. As humans, stress is a normal part of all of our lives. We just missed the bus or we're late for a meeting, etc. So we're built to take a certain amount of stress. But when that stress is daily, it is relentless, it does not stop, and there doesn't appear to be any signs of improvement, that's what tends to lead to situations where pharmacists start to, because they've got no alternative, they start to work in a different way. Sometimes mistakes are made, sometimes they fall ill. That long-term stress leads to burnout. Now, there's a number of things that can prevent that thing from happening in the first place, because, as healthcare professionals, we're taught to actually treat the causes, not just deal with the symptoms. So the idea that we have a well-being strategy is that we recognise that there is an importance of well-being in the workplace. That needs to be recognised more widely by everybody associated with the workplace. So employers have to take well-being seriously. They have to take working conditions seriously. All of the organisations in pharmacy need to take well-being seriously. We say we're privileged because we're members of a caring profession. And the emphasis there is because we care for people. But actually, is the profession a caring profession that actually cares about the very people that make up the profession, that are the pharmacists? And that's the mindset that we need to start getting into amongst all of the leadership organisations in pharmacy. If we want future pharmacists to understand that they're going to be members of a caring profession, then we need to demonstrate and show them we actually are trying to improve their well-being, look after them as the individuals that make up that profession. So the reason why specifically we set up our wellbeing strategy is because there are lots of talking shops that go on in pharmacy. People talk about wellbeing and they put headlines in magazines. We talked about wellbeing today. But actually, if there's one thing I've learned in the 23 years of being at the head of the PDA is it's much more important to do and to act than just to talk. So we established our wellbeing strategy because the time for talk was over. We've seen all the figures, we've seen all the statistics, they're appalling, and it's time that we did something. So our wellbeing strategy, yes, it was one that we set up within our organisation. It involves first training our staff who have to deal with the phone calls that they get from pharmacists to understand more so about stress, to understand more so about how to respond to some of the appeals for help that we get. And it's a recognition that our staff have stress when they have to deal with that day in, day out. So part of the strategy is helping our staff to understand more so about stress and well-being. But the second part of the strategy is to try and then roll that out amongst the profession. And part of that is ultimately to get other organisations to take well-being far more seriously.
Yeah, that's great. So it's a two-pronged approach, making sure that your staff who are, I suppose, exposed to some quite traumatic experiences every day, making sure that they're okay as they deal with this, but then also making sure that we're rolling it out in pharmacies and places of employment for pharmacists across the country. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So from the 15th of April this month, the PDA has decided to double its donation to £2 for every member who joins or renews. And as a pharmacist yourself, why do you believe it's important for pharmacists to be a part of organizations like the PDA? And why do you feel it's important to increase your donations during this month?
Well, just to be clear, we are celebrating the 185th birthday of Pharmacist Support, and as a birthday initiative, we've got that increase for a period of 1 month.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it's still a significant increase because we've got members joining us at the rate of about 3,000 to 4,000 every month, all renewing. So that will make a significant difference. I have to be honest, and with a little bit of tongue in cheek, we want to embarrass other organisations in pharmacy to put their hands in their pockets, and rather than talk about this whole area and well-being and how they help Pharmacist Support, actually do something to help Pharmacist Support, who can then help the pharmacists that have been broken by the situation that I've described before. So the challenge there is, look, we're doing this, others need to do this as well. So it is an appeal to all of the organisations in pharmacy to put their money where their mouth is and actually do something about it. And if it means embarrassing people, then fine. We don't have that problem. And I hope I haven't embarrassed you today, Danielle, in doing this. But yes, we are doing this. It's a leadership thing. I recognise that. We want other organisations to do the same.
Brilliant. Yeah. And if that did, I can only imagine what we could do as a charity. I mean, the sky's the limit. There's so much that people need and that we can provide. And I think that's a really, really powerful message because as Danielle said before, demand is growing constantly. Our counseling service is under more demand than we ever realized it would be in the beginning. So there are things that we need to change and adapt to and provide to pharmacists, and it's very helpful for us having the support of the PDA. And it would be wonderful to have more organizations stepping up to help fund some of the support that pharmacists desperately need.
And I think you're absolutely right, Melissa. You know, the more organisations that could donate to us, the more we can do. There is so much more we could be doing. And as we're facing an increase in demand, what that's doing is we have to focus our resources on delivering the counselling sessions, delivering that financial support. But a crucial part of our work also is delivering the proactive support. It's not all about crisis. We want less people to get to crisis. So the Act Now Wellbeing campaigns, the great wellbeing resources and workshops and things that we deliver, we'd love to do more of that, and we'd love organisations to engage with us to do some more of that work, because the less people that we can, you know, get to crisis point, they're not at that crisis point because we've helped them. You know, that's a great mission as well for us to get to. You know, we don't want to just be, you know, giving out numbers, which is we've seen a huge increase in number of counselling sessions delivered. We want that coming down because we want less people to need it. So, you know, there's another crucial element to the charity that we need to fundraise for.
That's absolutely resonates with me. So Danielle, one of the most powerful ways to understand the value of partnerships by this is to understand who they're helping. So do you have any examples or stories of people who have had life-changing experiences from interventions that we've done for them?
Oh, there's hundreds of stories. There's so many stories I can share, and that, you know, there are some stories I can share that are quite harrowing and quite hard to hear. But there are also people who come to us who just didn't expect to be in the position, and they just need a helping hand. And it's not all kind of life-changing in terms of it's such a big thing that when we help them through it, it can just be to keep them on the road and to keep them, you know, healthy and happy. For example, you know, our Listening Friends peer support service, that's a really vital service that can just help someone through a difficult period. You know, it might just be they're having difficulties at work, they've got no one to talk to about it, and they just need that listening ear, and actually that just helps them, like, maybe make a decision about what they do next. So, you know, not everything is completely life-changing, but it definitely helps. I mean, but we do have those cases where it is transformational. The one example I think has really stuck with me, but a particular lady we've helped in the last couple of years, was a lady who actually fled a domestic violence situation with her son. And at the time she was a trainee, she hadn't passed the assessment, and she'd actually failed the first assessment when she came to us, and she wanted to flee the situation. Really difficult time, and incredibly brave, you know, at a time when, you know, you've not necessarily qualified and you've got that stress. So after kind of failing the first assessment, she came to us, and we helped support her in lots of ways, practically in a way. So we helped fund kind of the payment for the assessment so she could resit, and she passed. But we provided that holistic support. So obviously that's a terrible situation to be going through. So we could provide that psychological support, both through counselling and later on through the peer support Listening Friends service. The great advice and support of our team, signposting to different areas as well for different needs. And then when she became a pharmacist, you know, she'd moved, she didn't have that kind of connection. She'd moved to a new area, so we were able to fund a small grant to provide some transport so she could take up a role as a hospital pharmacist. So as she was rebuilding her life, we could just help her along the way. And she always reports back to us, and I'm pleased to say she's really thriving in her role. And she does credit kind of the practical, emotional and that financial support to help her on the way. And I think that's a prime example of how our support, when someone comes to us, you know, we don't just say, oh, do you want a grant? We look at the situation and say, these are all the ways we can help you, and we'll be there. And that, you know, we helped that lady over 2 years, like the team was always there to check in. So I think that's a really good example of, without pharmacist support, I often wonder, where would that lady be? Would she be a pharmacist, making a real difference now and really thriving? Her son's, now got a really bright future. So to me, that's a really powerful kind of life-changing story.
Absolutely.
Sorry for interrupting, but I have to say, I've listened to that story and I'm familiar with many more stories like that, both at Pharmacist Support and at the PDA. But, a sign of a civilised society is one that extends a helping hand to those that are in a worse position, the weakest members of our society. And if you could put in a bottle what that pharmacist felt that you helped through that process, you could bottle that. Just imagine the amount of positive input you've put into that person's life. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. That's the role for pharmacist support. If ever anybody questions what's the need for pharmacist support, they shouldn't question it for a millisecond, because that is an absolutely vital role. Here was a person who thought that was the end of their career before it even started. And with the help provided by pharmacist support, they made it through. They will be grateful for the rest of their lives, and society will have a pharmacist that otherwise wouldn't have existed at all. Now that's what we're talking about. That's why we need everybody in the profession to get behind and provide support to pharmacist support.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that I would say to even add to what you just said, Mark, is that this lady had a son, and now that child's future is brighter and better, and you can break cycles through providing support. You can break intergenerational cycles through providing the right support to people at the right time. So we're not even just talking about her and having another pharmacist out there, but there could be generations who are impacted by this act, and it is really, really powerful. So I very much agree with you. So Mark, on a personal level, we often talk about supporting the well-being of others, but we do need to help ourselves first. They always say on an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first. And I do quite like that, because it's so true on the airplane, but it's also true anywhere else. If you can't take care of yourself, you don't have anything really to give. So what do you personally do to support your well-being, especially given the pressures that leadership roles can bring?
Well, look, I'm fortunate, because despite the subject matter of the role that the PDA has, and I think Danielle has just put her finger on it, the fulfilment, the professional fulfilment you get by being able to help others consistently, and that's your day job, is actually very rewarding, and it does add to your well-being, as it were. But you're right, the hours are long, the tempo is relentless. So what I tend to do is I walk the dog very early in the morning. It's usually dark, and I've usually got earphones on, and I used to listen to this Blink app, and what it does is it condenses a book into 20 minutes. I wish that was available when I was a pharmacy student, but anyway. And that was fine, but the only problem was I kept on bumping into lampposts with that one, and the dog looked up at me going, "Daddy, you better pack this in, mate." So now I just listen to music when I walk the dog through the earphones, and haven't bumped into any lampposts recently. So I get a lot of, your mind just goes into free cycle, helps you think, and you just come back much more relaxed, and the dog's happy as well. That's a bonus.
Yeah, that's great. And just thinking about leaders and the pressures in leadership, and I just want to plug our listening friends service here for a minute, because we do have people who are listening friends who have had quite senior leadership positions. And so for leaders out there in the pharmacy profession who feel that there's nobody they can really talk to about what they're going through, it can be a lonely position to be in and a high pressure position. I just think on the back of that, I wanted to say we do have listening friends who can provide that support to leaders who might feel alone in the situation that they're going through, to help out. So Danielle, as a leader within the charity sector, particularly during Stress Awareness Month, what do you do to support the team's well-being and to reduce stress within the organization?
Yeah, so for me, I think reducing stress is all about creating the right environment, that supportive workplace culture, where people feel valued and able to thrive. I think that's really important. If the culture's not right, no matter what we do, it's never going to work. And I think to create that culture, you need to be open and honest. You need to allow people to be open and honest about how they're feeling, what the challenges are, and to take that on board. You know, you can encourage people to be open, but then if you never listen to it, then, you know, then they're going to stop being open. They're going to stop bothering telling you what the problems are. And I think as a leader, for any leader or manager, it's essential to model those healthy behaviours, because if you tell your team, take a break, go for a walk, do these things, but you never do it, you know, you sit at your desk, you don't take a lunch break, they're never going to feel able to do it because you're modelling that behaviour. So to me, you know, you doing that, you showing that work-life balance is important, gives staff permission to do the same. So I think that's really important. In terms of us as a charity, I mean, we do regularly check in with our teams, and that's not just focused on workload. I think it's really important to check in just to see where people are. You know, we've all got to respect that people have lives beyond work, and there is lots of stress that people deal with, and that can impact work. So just checking in and having those honest conversations without judgment. We have something called a My Wellbeing Plan, which is optional for all staff. And that is just an opportunity where you create the space for people to be able to share that. Because it can be really difficult. I know I find it difficult, you know, to sit down and go, well, these are the things. Sometimes you want to keep work very separate and you want to be very professional and you have your home life. But, you know, we've got to accept that stress is stress, whether it's home stress or work stress. So I think creating that environment is really important. We built flexibility into the way we work, which I think is really empowering and allows people to manage kind of personal responsibilities, work responsibilities, and gives the freedom. I think that's had a huge impact on people's well-being. I think prioritising clear communications, I think realistic expectations. I think if people are uncertain about what the deadlines are, what they're supposed to be doing, that unknown can just create a huge amount of stress. So just being really clear can really help people, knowing what's coming, even if it's going to be a busy period. If you know it's going to be a busy period and it's planned out, you can kind of prepare for it. There's nothing worse than the unknown for people in terms of stress. So I think that just drives that stress. And the last thing really is when people are feeling at the point they need support, being open as a charity about what support we can provide as an employer, what other support's out there, signposting to that, encouraging people, reminding people about it, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I think we've come to a great place to wrap up. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Danielle and Mark, for your time today. I think that this will provide a lot of food for thought for people. I think hopefully it will inspire people to look into what the PDA can do for them, look into what the charity can do for them, maybe even to look into how they can support the work that we're doing. So thank you both very, very much. We always hope that our listeners are feeling inspired to bring about positive changes in their own lives. If today's podcast has resonated with you, you'll find out further well-being information, videos, and online content on our website and on our well-being learning platform, which is available for pharmacists, pharmacist students, and trainees for free. So for further information on our support, please click on the How We Can Help link in the podcast description, and don't hesitate to reach out if you feel you may need support. We want to continue to provide our free and confidential support services and to open up conversations like this to ensure that no one in our pharmacy family faces challenging times alone. As an independent charity, we rely on donations from individuals and organizations across the profession to enable us to do this. If you're in a position to do so, please consider making a donation today. You can find a QR code in the show's description or at the end of the video. Donations help us to provide our essential services, including our counseling and peer support, financial assistance, and more. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next podcast. And thank you again, Danielle and Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.